Alright, I have another one of these racing videos that I want to do. This one is about rules. Something that's been on my mind for a while to do something like this, and a conversation just recently prompted me, like, shit, Gordon, you should probably do this in video form like you've been talking about. So, car racing rules. There's kind of two schools of thought when it comes to car racing rules, in the amateur level anyway. And then is that there is kind of these open rule sets, and then there's like a continuum all the way to spec rules. So you can see where this is going. Some people argue with these kind of open rule sets, and a lot of these include like formulas as far as like power and weight and things like that, but that brings up a whole bunch of errors because dynos are horribly inaccurate, and I've seen cars dyno the same thing, like literally the same car, dyno 5-10 horsepower different, not doing anything, just depending on whatever the fuck happens. So if you try and use power to weight ratio, you're already in bad shape because power is very difficult to measure consistently, which means your whole formula is fucked. So there's that problem first, number one. And then there's oftentimes all these modifiers for what tires you use and things like that. And these all kind of fall into this, like, once someone kind of figures out the best way to, quote, spend their points, then you no longer really have this freedom anymore, right? So now you have to do the same thing as everybody else is doing, which is what a regular rule book that, specifies what you can do to your car does already. So it's kind of like getting to a middle ground rule book where you just have here's what you can do to your car in these classes by some... It's just more steps to get to the same place, right? So you might as well start at here's what you can do to your car instead of like having a bunch of people spend a bunch of money trying to figure out what the right formula is. Just like write the formula, right? But lots of people think that this saves them money because they can take a car that doesn't really fit a class and run it, and they're like, I'm saving money. Or they make arguments like, well, I have an S2000, and since Ks are kind of expensive, I'm going to put a Honda Odyssey V6 in it because I can pull them out of junkyards for $400 and make the same power as a K, and it'll be more reliable and way cheaper. And like that may seem like it makes sense on the face value, but it quickly goes awry because as soon as you start allowing things like V6 motor swaps, all of a sudden somebody is going to like build this insane monster that fits in the rules because you've allowed them so much freedom. This is the problem like with the SCCA's street class rule book. You have cars in East Street that like you could go buy the car for $3,000 and it has $7,000 shocks on it, right? Because the rule book just says you can replace the shocks with anything that you want to, right? And so people are spending double the price of the car on the fucking shocks in the car so you do this to everything in the car, right? Which is what most of these open rule sets kind of allow you to do, like a lot of things. And then all of a sudden you have to optimize every single component, which number one takes testing, which costs money, and like the parts themselves become really like fucking expensive, especially things like shocks. And so these like open rule sets very quickly become catastrophically expensive. Something like SSM in SCCA Solo is kind of like a catch-all, like, yeah, you can do motor swaps, you can do some aero, like, but when you go and look at a serious build to this rule set, it's $100,000 car. Like, seriously, it's like $100,000 car that you end up having to build in order to compete because you have this open rule set. So, as you can tell, I'm quite a proponent of racing under very, very specified rules in most cases. Because people, like, the arguments against those is, like, for example, in Spec Miata, your motor is pretty important, right? Um, the cars don't make that much power, and so 2 or 3 horsepower can mean a lot. It can be car lengths, and that can be the difference between winning and getting fifth, right? And so 2 or 3 horsepower means a lot, so people spend a lot of money to try and get those extra 2 or 3 horsepower. The saving grace, though, of like a spec rule set is that you can only do so much, and if you write your rules intelligently, the people who are spending cubic dollars on problems are only getting a tiny fraction of an improvement from it, right? So you can go and buy a pro motor for like $5,000 and it will give you 99.9% as much power as somebody who wants to spend $10,000-$15,000 on the motor, right? So you've just tripled the cost of your motor and you've gained almost nothing. Now maybe you've gained a horsepower or two, maybe, don't know, depends on the atmospheric conditions of the day, frankly. But that's the point, is in order, if you like design your spec rule sets appropriately, you can control costs by making each incremental bit above a certain point catastrophically expensive while not making it advantageous. Right? So, like, again, there's lots of these myths that go around, like people using WD-40 in their wheel bearings and stuff like that, and that only lasts one race, so you gotta replace all 4 wheel bearings every race, evidently. Right? Like, no, none of these things are... The real complaint that I have about the Spec Miata rule set is that our tire is not particularly good. And it degrades quite quickly, which for a small lightweight car shouldn't be a thing. And so, like, the dumb thing is, like, well, people, like, well, what circulates around in the internet zeitgeist is $15,000 pro motors and replacing your wheel bearings every race or every session, and so running costs are insane or whatever. In reality, the reason why running costs are expensive in Spec Miata is because between the first and the 10th heat cycle of your tire, that's over a second, usually. And so by the 5th or 6th heat cycle, you want to not be racing on those tires anymore, which means you only get one weekend out of a set of tires sometimes. And that's expensive. So how do you want to, how do you go faster in a demonstrable way? You bring 5 sets of tires, right? And you just run sticker tires for every session. And then you'll be in good shape. And so that's... the internet zeitgeist is full of $100,000 Spec Miatas, but that's not really the case. That if you really want to go faster, like for cheaper, just fucking put sticker tires in your car. It's that simple. And some people do that, and there is talk of making a tire limiting rule for exactly this reason. But what people don't seem to grasp in this rules discussion is that rules are a good thing. Rules don't stop you from doing something. They stop the guy who makes 10 times as much money as you from fuck youing a class and just building an insane car. And, like, this has happened. There was this guy who is now in jail, interestingly enough, but he wanted to win runoffs so bad, he had like $1 million effort at SCCA runoffs to win GT1. Like, so, like, there is fuck you money out there, and the rules save us normies who, like, I make good money, I'm an engineer, I'm 10 years into my career, I don't have any wife and kids, I make pretty good money. But these people have fuck you money, and they will destroy you if the rules let them. And so, like, the rules are a good thing. They save you all of this money, because what's interesting, though, is that the biggest proponents, I feel like, of open rule sets are, like, Joe 19-year-old service writer or whatever, who, like, really, really, really wants to put camber adjusters on their car and doesn't realize that if you legalize moving suspension points or something like that, like, someone will purposely redesign a suspension completely in order to get an advantage, and it will be a real advantage, and then they will fucking destroy you with it. So, I am a big fan of as specified of rules as you can possibly get, and um, just because it saves you. The rule book saves you. And I've had this experience in my life. Very early in my autocrossing career, I blew up a motor in an MR2 Spider. And as anybody knows, who knows those cars, knows that the 2ZZ fits in just as easily as the 1ZZ. So I swapped that in because it honestly didn't cost me that much more than putting in a new motor, new 1ZZ, and I get 40 extra horsepower, plus it made glorious noises. That was a glorious car. But what it did is it put me into a builder's class where people were bringing like fucking GTRs and like 4-liter GT3s and shit like that into this class, right? And so, like, the rules protect you, and staying in classes that restrict what you can do keeps it even. Now, if you're one of these rich fucks who can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to go and win a class, this video doesn't apply to you. But for all the rest of us who just want to fucking race cars because it's fucking fun, like, the rule book is a good thing, and the more rules, the better. And I mean, they have to be intelligent rules, don't get me wrong, like I said, but the rules will save your ass if they are written properly. And when they're these open catch-all rules, it like, it may seem cheaper or easier because, like, you can fit cars in multiple classes or whatever, but really when the rubber meets the road and someone wants to win, they're just going to build to the class, and they will destroy you if they're willing to spend the money to do it. So anyway, that's my opinion on rules, and I am like I said, very in favor of spec series racing in general. Like, down to the fucking part numbers. That's what we have it in Spec Miata, and like Spec Racer Fords, like, they get one brake pad. They don't get to pick. We have the option of like 6 or 8 different popular companies to buy brake pads from. They get one brake pad. Like, it's that spec, and like, I'm in favor of that. They have sealed motors in Spec Racer Ford where you buy your motor, it literally makes the exact same horsepower as the next one that the guy next to you has, as long as you, like, so you replace your motor every few years because it wears out, but you know that you're making the exact horsepower that the guy next to you is making, and like, that's awesome. Like, that's what you want, right? Because if you just want to buy a win, like, go do that. I don't care. There's a reason why builders classes don't have the same they don't have the same prestige vis-a-vis the driver as like really high intensity driver classes. So anyway, that's my take on rules. It's kind of counterintuitive unless you've lived the life for a while, but I just kept seeing a lot of these arguments coming up, and I've been meaning to, preach this one for a while. So yeah, that's that. So have a good one.